Fred Miller stared at his reflection in the executive washroom mirror, straightening his tie for the third time. At 52, he still cut an impressive figure, salt and pepper hair, athletic build maintained through decades of morning runs, and the confident bearing that came from building Miller Construction from the ground up. 25 years of marriage to Sarah, 3 kids through college, and a reputation as one of Boston's most reliable contractors. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The first crack appeared 3 months ago. A missed dinner here, a cancelled weekend there. Sarah's explanations made sense. Her charity work at the women's shelter was demanding, especially with their annual fundraiser approaching. But something in her voice had changed. The warmth that had sustained them through decades of partnership had cooled, replaced by a brittle efficiency that set his teeth on edge. "Mr. Miller." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Thompson contract review starts in 5 minutes. On my way, Jenny." Fred grabbed his laptop, pushing his unease aside. He had a company to run. The meeting dragged on, filled with the usual haggling over timelines and materials costs. Fred found himself checking his phone more often than usual, waiting for Sarah's customary lunch message. It never came. That evening, pulling into their driveway in Brookline, Fred noticed Sarah's car was missing. No text, no note on the kitchen counter. Just silence. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and settled into his study, trying to focus on project estimates. The house felt wrong somehow, as if the familiar spaces had shifted slightly while he wasn't looking. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom, his oldest friend and legal counsel for Miller Construction. "Need to talk. Urgent. Can you meet?" Fred's stomach tightened. Tom never sent urgent messages after hours unless something was seriously wrong. "Where?" "Murphy's. 30 minutes. The Irish pub was nearly empty when Fred walked in, the Tuesday night crowd thin. Tom sat in their usual corner booth, his usual neat appearance disheveled. A manila envelope sat unopened on the table. "You look like hell," Fred said, sliding into the booth. Tom didn't smile. "Mike, what I'm about to show you. I'm your friend first, lawyer second. Remember that." The envelope contained photographs. High-quality surveillance shots taken with a long lens. Sarah, entering a downtown hotel. Sarah, sitting close to a man in an upscale restaurant. Sarah, kissing that same man in a parking garage. Who is he? Fred's voice sounded strange in his ears, distant and hollow. James Carter. Managing partner at Riverside Development. Tom hesitated. They're our biggest competitors for the waterfront project. The bourbon turned to acid in Fred's stomach. Riverside had been underbidding them on major projects for months, somehow always coming in just under Miller Construction's best numbers. Now he knew why. "There's more," Tom said quietly. "Financial records. Someone's been accessing our secure servers, downloading bid information, project specs. The IP addresses trace back to Sarah's laptop." Fred stared at the photos spread before him, his world tilting on its axis. 25 years of trust, of building a life together, reduced to cold evidence of betrayal. Not just their marriage, but his life's work, everything he'd built, everything he'd believed in. "What do you want to do?" Tom asked. Fred gathered the photos with steady hands, his mind already calculating angles, resources, possibilities. The hurt would come later. Right now, he needed to think. "Nothing," he said finally. "We do nothing. Yet." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Mike. I need to understand the whole picture. Every player, every angle." Fred's voice hardened. "She's not just betraying me. She's betraying our family, our employees, everyone who depends on Miller Construction. I need to know why." And then? Fred stood, tucking the envelope into his jacket. And then I'll decide what kind of justice this deserves. Driving home, Fred's thoughts circled like hungry wolves. Sarah's car was in the driveway now, warm light spilling from the kitchen windows. Inside, she'd act normal, kiss his cheek, ask about his day. And he would smile, play his part, while behind his eyes, plans began to take shape. The game had changed. But Sarah didn't know that yet. And in the coming weeks, Fred would learn that this betrayal went deeper than he could imagine, reaching into the darkest corners of his life, threatening everything he held dear. For now, he straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and prepared to face the woman who had shattered his world with a smile on his face. The real work would begin tomorrow. The next morning, Fred watched Sarah prepare for her day with the detached fascination of a man observing a stranger wearing his wife's face. Her movements were familiar, the way she stirred honey into her tea, the slight frown as she checked her phone, yet now seemed performed, rehearsed. 25 years of marriage had become theater overnight. The shelter's fundraiser is next week, Sarah said, not meeting his eyes. I might be late again tonight. So much still to organize. Of course, Fred replied, his voice warm with practiced concern. Need any help? She smiled, the same smile that had once made his heart skip. No, we've got it covered. Thanks for understanding. Understanding. The word tasted like ashes in his mouth. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, Fred went to work. He'd built his business by being methodical, patient, thorough. Now he'd apply those same skills to unraveling the web of lies around him. His first call was to Marcus Chen, head of IT at Miller Construction. I need every security log, every access record for the past 6 months. And Marcus? Keep this between us. The data arrived within hours. Fred locked himself in his home office, ignoring calls from the site managers. The pattern emerged quickly: late-night server access, downloaded files, encrypted communications. But something wasn't right. The timestamp showed activity even when he knew Sarah had been home, asleep beside him. She's not working alone, he muttered, rubbing his temples. A knock at the door made him jump. Dad? His daughter Amy's voice. Can I come in? Amy, his youngest at 24, had inherited his analytical mind and her mother's grace. Now she stood in his doorway, concern etched on her face. You missed lunch. Jenny called, said you weren't answering your phone. Sorry, sweetheart. Just focused on some problems with the waterfront project. Amy's frown deepened. Is this about Mom's friend? The one who keeps coming to the house when you're not here? Fred's heart stopped. What friend? Some woman. Elegant, expensive clothes. I saw her last week when I stopped by to pick up my old textbooks. Mom seemed nervous when I mentioned it. A woman, not James Carter. Fred's mind raced. Did you catch her name? Elena, I think. Mom introduced her as someone from the shelter, but... Amy hesitated. Dad, something felt off. The way they were talking, like they stopped as soon as they saw me. And Elena was using Mom's laptop, said something about financial records. Elena. The name tugged at Fred's memory. He pulled up the Riverside Development website on his computer, scrolling through their executive team. There, Elena Rossi, Chief Financial Officer. Former investment banker, known for aggressive corporate acquisitions. Amy, when exactly was this? Last Thursday, around 2. Why? The server logs showed heavy activity that afternoon: project bids, financial statements, client lists. But the access point wasn't Sarah's laptop. It was his own executive account. Fred's blood ran cold. Only 3 people had those credentials: himself, his CFO Robert Walsh, and Sarah. He'd given her emergency access years ago, trusting her completely. Dad? Amy touched his arm. What's wrong? Fred forced a smile. Nothing, sweetheart. Just business stuff. Hey, why don't you come to dinner tonight? Been too long since we had father-daughter time. After Amy left, Fred made another call. Tom. I need everything you can find on Elena Rossi. And get me a meeting with Robert Walsh. Don't tell him it's about the security breach. That evening, over pasta at their favorite Italian restaurant, Fred watched his daughter talk about her residency at Mass General, her dreams of opening her own practice. The familiar rhythms of family love cut deeper than any betrayal. Sarah wasn't just destroying their marriage, she was threatening the legacy he'd built for their children. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom: Walsh agreed to breakfast tomorrow. But Mike. Elena Rossi isn't just Riverside CFO. She's Carter's ex-wife. And she has a history with hostile takeovers. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about industrial espionage or a midlife affair. This was something bigger, more calculated. Sarah wasn't just a willing participant, she was a pawn in a larger game. But why? What had made her vulnerable to manipulation? What secrets was she keeping? Dad? Amy's voice pulled him back. Tell me the truth. Are you and Mom okay? Fred looked at his daughter, seeing the worry in her eyes. The truth would shatter her world as completely as it had shattered his. Not yet. Not until he understood the full scope of what he was facing. We're working through some things, he said carefully. But Amy, I promise you, I'm going to protect our family. No matter what it takes. Later that night, reviewing the files Tom had sent, Fred found something that made his blood freeze. Elena Rossi had a connection to Sarah that went back decades, long before their marriage. A shared history that raised questions about everything Fred thought he knew about his wife. Tomorrow's meeting with Robert Walsh would be crucial. But as Fred prepared for bed, hearing Sarah's car pull into the driveway, he wondered, in this web of lies and manipulation, who could he truly trust? The answer, he feared, would cost him far more than he was prepared to lose. The breakfast meeting with Robert Walsh never happened. At 6:45 a.m., Fred received a text from Tom: Walsh found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide. Fred sat in his parked car outside the diner, watching early morning commuters hurry past. Robert Walsh had been his CFO for 15 years. The man had attended his children's graduations, celebrated holidays with their family. The official story, prescription overdose, a typed note citing financial troubles, felt wrong in ways Fred couldn't articulate. His phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number: the Marina. Pier 7. 9 a.m. Come alone. E. Elena Rossi. Fred's instincts screamed trap, but the shadow of Walsh's death drove him forward. He needed answers. The woman waiting at Pier 7 bore little resemblance to her corporate headshots. Elena Rossi was smaller in person, her expensive clothes a armor rather than adornment. She watched him approach with eyes that had seen too much. Robert Walsh didn't kill himself, she said without preamble. Why should I believe anything you say? Fred kept his distance, hands in his pockets. You're helping destroy my company. No. Elena's voice softened. I'm trying to save Sarah. Again. The word again hung between them like smoke. Elena pulled out an old photograph, creased and worn. Two young women, arms around each other, laughing at the camera. Sarah and Elena, decades younger. We met in college, Elena said. Freshman year. Sarah was different then. Vibrant, fearless. Until she met James Carter. Fred's world tilted. What? They dated our senior year. James was charming, wealthy, seemed perfect. Then the control started. Small things at first, checking her phone, questioning her friends, subtle criticisms that broke down her confidence. By graduation, Sarah was a shadow of herself. Fred's mind raced back to when he first met Sarah, how quiet she'd been, how it had taken months for her to trust him. What happened? I helped her leave him. It was bad. James didn't take rejection well. His family had connections, they made sure no one believed her stories. The police report disappeared. Sarah lost her job, her apartment. She had to rebuild her entire life. Fred remembered those early years, how Sarah would wake from nightmares she refused to discuss. How she'd flinch at unexpected touches. He'd attributed it to anxiety, never pushing for explanations she wasn't ready to give. Why now? He demanded. Why is she working with him after all this time? Elena's face hardened. 6 months ago, James acquired evidence of certain financial irregularities at Miller Construction. Transactions that could ruin you, send you to prison. Sarah came to me for help, but by then it was too late. James had her trapped. What irregularities? My books are clean. Are they? Elena pulled out another envelope. Robert Walsh was very thorough at hiding his tracks. Years of embezzlement, money laundering through shell companies. He was working with James the whole time, setting up leverage. The documents told a devastating story. Walsh had been placing poison pills in Miller Construction for years, creating a web of fraudulent transactions that implicated Fred. One anonymous tip to the SEC would destroy everything. Sarah discovered it by accident, Elena continued. She was trying to protect you, protect your children. James offered her a deal, help him acquire Miller Construction legitimately through Riverside, and the evidence disappears. Otherwise I go to prison. The weight of it settled on Fred's shoulders. And Walsh? He got greedy, threatened to expose everything unless James paid him more. Now he's dead. Elena stood. Sarah loves you, Fred. Everything she's done, every betrayal, was to save you from James's revenge. Why are you telling me this? Because James won't stop with acquiring your company. He wants to destroy you completely, make Sarah watch it happen. Just like before. Elena's voice cracked. I couldn't save her then. Not completely. The scars, they never really heal. Fred thought of Sarah's charity work at the women's shelter, her quiet determination to help others escape abusive relationships. How had he never seen the deeper truth? Help me, he said quietly. Help me protect her. Elena smiled sadly. That's why I'm here. But Fred, stopping James means burning everything down. Your company, your reputation, maybe even your freedom. Are you prepared for that? Before Fred could answer, his phone rang. Amy's number. Dad? His daughter's voice was terrified. Mom's in the hospital. There was an accident. Dad, they're saying it wasn't an accident at all. Fred met Elena's eyes, saw his own fear reflected there. The game had changed again, but this time he understood the stakes. This wasn't about business or betrayal anymore. This was about survival. And somewhere in the city, James Carter was moving his next piece, orchestrating an endgame that had been decades in the making. The real question wasn't whether Fred could save his company. The question was, could he save his family before the past claimed another victim? The hospital corridor seemed endless, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Amy's face as she led Fred to Sarah's room. The police are calling it a hit and run, she explained quietly. But Dad, her car was parked. Someone deliberately drove into her door as she was getting out. Fred's mind flashed to his conversation with Elena just hours before. This was James Carter's message, a reminder that he could reach them anywhere, anytime. Sarah lay still against white sheets, her face pale but peaceful under sedation. The doctors spoke of miracle timing, another inch, another moment, and the impact would have been fatal. Fred sat beside her bed, taking her hand, remembering how small it had felt on their first date, how strong it had been holding their newborn children. "What aren't you telling me?" Amy's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her doctor's training evident in the way she studied both her parents. "This isn't just about the company, is it?" Fred looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah's strength in her stance. "No," he said finally. "It's about wounds that never fully healed. And a man who refuses to let them." He told her everything, Elena's revelations, James Carter's history with Sarah, Walsh's betrayal. Amy listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to understanding to a deep, quiet anger. "All these years," she whispered. "The women's shelter, the way she'd get quiet sometimes. I always sensed there was something she wasn't telling us. But I never imagined." "Neither did I." Fred's voice cracked. "I was so focused on building our perfect life, I missed the signs that she was still carrying these scars." A soft sound from the bed made them both turn. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Fred's face. Fear flickered across her features, then resignation. "James," she whispered. It was him. Fred squeezed her hand. "Elena told me everything, Sarah. About college, about Walsh, about the blackmail. Why didn't you come to me?" Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks. "He showed me the evidence. Said he'd destroy you, destroy everything we built for our children. I thought I could handle him this time. Be stronger." Her voice broke. "I was so wrong." Amy moved to her mother's other side, taking her free hand. "Mom, you don't have to be strong alone anymore. We're here." Sarah's eyes widened, panic crossing her face. "No, you don't understand. James, he has people everywhere. Robert, what happened to Robert wasn't suicide. I heard them planning, but I couldn't warn him in time. And now we fight back," Fred said firmly. "Together." A knock at the door made them all jump. Elena stood there, her usual polish replaced by urgent tension. "Fred, we have a problem. James is making his move. The SEC just announced an investigation into Miller Construction. The press already has the story." Fred's phone erupted with notifications, messages from board members, clients, reporters. The carefully constructed trap was springing shut. "He's trying to force a panic sale," Elena explained. "Once the stock price crashes, Riverside can step in with a rescue offer. By the time the investigation clears you, it'll be too late." Sarah struggled to sit up. "The evidence, I know where he keeps it. In his private safe, at the lake house. Elena and we were planning." "No." Fred's voice was steel. "You almost died today. I'm not losing you again." He turned to Elena. "Tell me about this lake house." "Dad." Amy's voice stopped him. "Look." She held up her phone, showing a breaking news alert. James Carter's smiling face filled the screen as he announced Riverside Development's commitment to preserving jobs during the upcoming acquisition of Miller Construction. "He's already acting like he's won," Amy said quietly. Fred stood, kissing Sarah's forehead. "That's his mistake." He looked at Elena. "You said stopping him means burning everything down. Fine. Let's burn it all." "Fred, wait." Sarah caught his arm. "There's something else you need to know. Something about that night in college, something not even Elena knows. If James realizes I remember." She swallowed hard. "It's not just about the company. He's afraid I'll remember everything." The monitors showed Sarah's heart rate climbing. Amy stepped in, doctor mode engaging. "She needs rest. Whatever we're planning, it waits until morning." Fred nodded, but his mind was already racing. In trying to destroy him, James Carter had made a crucial error. He'd threatened Fred's family. And Fred was done playing defense. "Stay with her," he told Amy. "Elena, we need to talk. Now." As they left the room, Fred glanced back at Sarah. She met his eyes with a look he hadn't seen in years, the fierce, unbroken spirit Elena had described from their college days. The woman James Carter had tried to destroy was still there, fighting to emerge. Tomorrow, they would begin dismantling James Carter's empire piece by piece. But tonight, watching his daughter tend to her mother with gentle determination, Fred understood something crucial: true strength wasn't in standing alone. It was in the bonds that held them together, the love that turned victims into survivors, the courage that transformed fear into power. James Carter was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Chapter 5, Echoes of Strength. Dawn found Sarah sitting up in her hospital bed, her daughter asleep in the chair beside her. Looking at Amy's face, peaceful in sleep, Sarah felt the familiar ache of maternal love mingled with fresh guilt. She had tried so hard to protect her children from her past, never realizing that her silence had created its own kind of wound. "You should be resting," Fred said softly from the doorway. He looked exhausted, his normally pristine suit wrinkled from a night of planning with Elena. "I've rested long enough," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than it had been yesterday. "It's time I told you everything. The whole truth." Amy stirred, blinking awake. Sarah reached for her daughter's hand, drawing strength from the contact. "Both of you need to hear this." The story emerged slowly, like water from a deep well. That night in college, it wasn't just about James's abuse. "I found documents in his father's study, evidence of human trafficking, using construction projects as cover. Women brought in for legitimate work, then disappeared. James caught me copying the files. When I tried to run." Sarah's hand trembled in Amy's grip. "Elena found me the next morning. I was hurt, badly. The hospital wanted to call the police, but James's father had already been there. The doctor who treated me disappeared a week later. That's when I understood what we were dealing with." Fred sat heavily in the other chair, his face ashen. "The women's shelter. All these years. Some of the women I helped, they weren't just escaping abusive relationships. They were escaping the same network. I couldn't stop it completely, but I could save a few. Give them new identities, help them disappear." Sarah's voice strengthened. "That's how I met Robert Walsh. He was helping launder the trafficking money through various construction companies. When he joined Miller Construction, I knew it was only a matter of time before James tried to use him against us." "The evidence in James's safe," Elena said from the doorway, where she had been listening. "It's not just about the company's finances, is it?" Sarah shook her head. "It's everything. 20 years of documentation. Names, dates, bank accounts. I've been gathering it piece by piece, every time he forced me to meet at the lake house. I thought if I could get enough evidence." "You were building a case," Amy whispered, doctor's training giving way to dawning understanding. "All those times you were late at the shelter. I was meeting with survivors, recording testimonies. Elena helped set up secure locations, protected identities. We have 16 women ready to testify, once we can guarantee their safety." Sarah's eyes met Fred's. "I couldn't tell you. If James suspected you knew, he'd have killed me," Fred finished quietly. "Like Walsh. Walsh found out what I was doing. He offered to help, said he was tired of being part of it. That's why." Sarah's voice broke. "That's why they killed him. Because of me." "No." Amy's voice was fierce. "Because of them. Because evil thrives when good people stay silent. You weren't being weak, Mom. You were being incredibly brave." Fred stood abruptly, pacing the small room. The SEC investigation, the company takeover, it's all a smokescreen. He's trying to stop you from exposing the trafficking network. Yes. Sarah watched her husband anxiously. Fred, I know I betrayed your trust. Stop. Fred returned to her bedside, taking her free hand. You carried this burden alone for so long, trying to protect everyone else. But you don't have to anymore. He looked at Elena. How many copies of the evidence exist? 3, Elena replied. Hidden in separate locations. But we need the originals from James's safe. Without them, it's our word against his family's connections. Amy straightened, her expression determined. The lake house has a medical helicopter pad. I can get access, say we need to assess it for emergency response planning. Map the security setup. Already thinking like a strategist, Elena smiled. Like mother, like daughter. Sarah watched her family planning, tears blurring her vision. For 20 years, she had carried her secrets like stones in her pockets, weighing her down, forcing her to wade through life instead of swimming freely. Now, sharing their weight, she felt something she had almost forgotten, hope. The door opened again, and Tom entered with a tablet. Fred, you need to see this. James Carter just called an emergency press conference. He's going to announce the final takeover bid for Miller Construction. But there's something else. Facial recognition just flagged multiple known trafficking suspects entering the city. They're bringing in muscle. Fred's phone buzzed, a text from James Carter himself, final offer. Walk away now, take a generous settlement. Sarah knows what happens if you don't. The threat hung in the air like smoke. But Sarah felt no fear, only a calm clarity. She looked at her daughter, strong and determined. At Elena, who had saved her once and never stopped trying to help. At Fred, whose love had given her a life she never thought she'd have. You know what happens now, she said quietly. If we do this, there's no going back. Everyone in this room becomes a target. Fred picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Carter's message. The question isn't whether we fight back. The question is, are we finally ready to end this? Not just for us, but for every woman still trapped in their network. Sarah sat up straighter, feeling decades of accumulated fear and shame falling away. Yes, she said firmly. It's time to bring it all into the light. The plan they formed over the next hour was dangerous, complex, and utterly necessary. But as Sarah watched her family work together, she realized something profound. Her greatest act of courage hadn't been surviving James Carter's abuse or gathering evidence against his crimes. It had been allowing herself to be loved, to be supported, to be seen, scars, secrets, and all. That was the kind of strength James Carter would never understand. And it would be his undoing. The lake house loomed against the autumn sunset, its windows reflecting gold like dying embers. Sarah stood at the tree line, Elena beside her, watching the security patrol make their rounds. After 20 years of carrying her secrets, the weight of this moment felt almost unbearable. You don't have to be here, Elena whispered, but Sarah shook her head. Yes, I do. She touched the small recording device hidden beneath her jacket. Some chains can only be broken by facing what forged them. The plan was already in motion. Fred was at the hastily called board meeting, keeping James Carter occupied with legal challenges to the takeover bid. Amy had successfully mapped the security system during her medical assessment, identifying the blind spots and patrol patterns. Tom was coordinating with federal agents, waiting for Sarah's signal. But plans, Sarah had learned, were delicate things. As she and Elena approached the house, using Sarah's old access code, she felt the familiar tremor in her hands. The last time she'd walked through this door alone, she'd been 22, naive, thinking she could change things by herself. Now she wasn't alone. The interior was exactly as she remembered, tasteful, expensive, cold. They moved silently through the shadows, avoiding the cameras Amy had marked. The safe was hidden behind a Monet in James's study, its combination unchanged. Sarah's fingers moved automatically. Rebecca's birthday, the day James's father had died, the year their empire began. Got it, Elena breathed, carefully removing the files. She started photographing each page with a specialized camera that would transmit the images directly to Tom. Sarah turned to keep watch, and froze. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. "I wondered if you'd come yourself," James Carter said softly. "Some part of me hoped you would." He stepped into the room, and Sarah felt decades of fear rise in her throat. But something was different. James looked older. Smaller. The monster of her memories had become just a man, dangerous but no longer overwhelming. "It's over, James," she said, her voice steady. "The evidence, the witnesses, everything. We're not those scared college students anymore. Aren't you?" He moved closer, that familiar smile playing at his lips. "Look at you, shaking. Still that same frightened girl, thinking she can play hero." "No." Sarah stood straighter, feeling Elena's presence behind her. "That girl survived. She grew stronger. She built a life you couldn't touch, raised children who'll never know your kind of cruelty. And she's not alone anymore." James's smile faltered. "You really think your perfect family can protect you? That Fred's love makes you untouchable?" He pulled out a phone. "One call, and my associates downtown will ensure your daughter never makes it home from her hospital shift." "Already taken care of," Elena said calmly. "Amy's been under federal protection since this morning. Just like the 16 women whose testimonies are being recorded right now. Your entire network is being dismantled as we speak." The change in James was instant, terrifying. He lunged forward, hands reaching for Sarah's throat, but this time, she was ready. The self-defense training from the women's shelter kicked in. She stepped aside, used his momentum against him. James stumbled, crashed into the desk. "Security will be here any second," he snarled, reaching for a drawer. "No, they won't." Fred's voice came from the doorway. He entered, Tom behind him with 2 federal agents. "Your security team has been redistributed. Amazing what people will reveal when they realize their boss is going down." James straightened, smoothing his jacket. The mask of civility slipped back into place. "You can't prove anything. My father's connections are also being arrested," Tom interrupted. "Along with the judges and officials on your payroll. The whole house of cards, James." Sarah and Elena made sure of that. The federal agents moved forward with handcuffs. James's eyes locked onto Sarah's, filled with a hatred that once would have devastated her. Now she met his gaze steadily, feeling not triumph but a deep, quiet peace. "You never understood," she said softly. "Real strength isn't in making others fear you. It's in helping them find their own courage." Hours later, Sarah sat in her hospital room, surrounded by her family. Amy was curled up beside her on the bed, while Fred kept a gentle hand on her shoulder. Elena sat nearby, coordinating with Tom as the arrests continued across the city. "The other women?" Sarah asked. "They're safe." "All of them," Elena assured her. "The safe houses worked. They're giving their statements now." 20 years of evidence, Sarah. "You did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected, looking at each face in turn. "All of us." Fred squeezed her shoulder. "Miller Construction stock will take a hit when this goes public. We might lose some contracts." "Good," Amy said firmly. "We'll rebuild it better. Clean. Maybe partner with organizations that help survivors rebuild their lives." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks, not tears of pain or fear, but of release. Of hope. The secrets that had haunted her for so long were finally in the light, and she hadn't shattered. She'd grown stronger, supported by the love she'd spent a lifetime building. "Mom." Amy's voice was soft. "Tell us about college. About who you were before, everything. I want to know that part of you too." Sarah looked at Fred, saw the same gentle encouragement in his eyes. The past didn't have to be a locked room anymore. It could be a bridge, connecting who she'd been to who she'd become. "I used to paint," she began slowly. "Wild, colorful things that made people laugh." As the story unfolded, Sarah felt the last chains of her past beginning to loosen. James Carter would face justice, his network would crumble, but the real victory wasn't in his destruction. It was in this moment, surrounded by family, finally free to be fully herself, scars and dreams and all. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Boston. Sarah watched the light paint the sky in shades of hope, knowing that some endings were really beginnings in disguise. She had survived the darkness. Now it was time to step into the light, holding tight to the hands that had helped her find her way home. Not to the person she'd been before James Carter, that girl was gone. But to someone stronger, wiser, more whole. Someone who understood that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it into wisdom, into compassion, into love. That was a victory worth more than any revenge.